No idea who that may have been, but I guess from my standpoint, we would certainly like to know. And second, would like to know, was it necessary to overfly residential communities where people are trying to sleep? And three, and more important, is there an alternative to overflying residential communities during that period of time? What are the options? And what is, if it's military, what is the military necessity for overflying residential communities, and are there not alternatives? And I can't believe that there aren't. So someone has made a decision to fly the number of birds that I've just mentioned and more, because I don't have the total. And second, that the flight path would be over that residential community. And if there's a military reason for that, I'm okay. But if there isn't, or it can be altered in terms of alternate paths, then why aren't we considering doing that? Which raises my next question. In terms of overflights, particularly in the evenings, are there options and alternate routes that can be taken to avoid predominantly residential communities where the impact is going to be felt and people are going to complain? Because if we have a choice, I presume the military, if you can take an alternate route and the mission is still going to be accomplished, you would prefer to take it too, unless it can't be accomplished in that fashion. So if I sound frustrated, I am, because I don't know what I'm talking about.
The value of this kind of discussion, specifically with some of the examples that the supervisors brought to the table, starts with the discussion. What's the concern? Who's doing what, where? When you deal with specifically noise complaints, and not just in the Washington metropolitan area and across the country and across the region, it's much like herding cats when you start. That's why when the inquiries come back, do you have a tail number? Do you have specific times? That type of information the supervisor has is extremely valuable. The date, the time, the perceived altitudes, because the people that report this in a lot of the different communities around the country, and specifically in the Northeast, some of them are aviation experts. Most of them that do report are have aviation backgrounds. Some of them just report anything. So we spend a lot of our time trying to sort through what that type of information is, who is there, route it to the appropriate agency or flight standards if it looks like an unsafe operation, or if it's unscheduled, or it might have been, and I'm just speculating because I don't know either. It might have been an accident on 495 or something like that, and medevac and those type of, but with that type of information, we can be responsive. The expectation that I get from a lot of the communities around the eastern region is that we continue with the dialogue. The absolute expectation of the individual inquiry, of getting an individual response when you're dealing with 1,300 or 1,400 on a holiday weekend up in the Northeast someplace, is that when we spend anywhere between $40,000 and $100,000 of our taxpayers' money, and my pay taxes too, by the way, to research this with flight tracks and whatever, we find out that 60% of them, these noise complaints are from 4% of the people that just don't like helicopters. They don't want them there for any reason or whatever. Helicopters, I'm a fixed wing pilot myself with over 4,000 hours. And I have the greatest admiration for helicopter pilots, because believe me, that's a hard thing to keep flying, and you have to be extremely skilled and to do that. Notwithstanding the levels of operations they operate at. So when we have meetings like this and we interact and we bring these people to the table, our ears are wide open. Our eyes are wide open. We want to see, we want to hear, we want to interact. And if there are changes that can happen or will happen, or just refreshing of the dialogue about the routes and the alternatives, we're open for that discussion. So if someone puts an inquiry in from the supervisor's office, we want to be in the position from the FAA's perspective and the military and the cooperating agencies to fill your head with enough information to do the initial response, any further inquiries that make you smart enough to come to us with specific recommendations and such. So the individual inquiry who gets a response that says, well, did you get a tail number? What time was it? What was the date? That's not flippant. That allows us to pinpoint where to look and when, and to engage the appropriate federal agency in working together in a response. If it's something we can't tell you, we'll just say, you know, or I may just sit up here and get yelled at for a good reason, and I'll just say, thank you very much, we'll take that, you know, and that's what we do with that. But if it's something specific that we can be responsive to, we will. And that's my commitment here, so.
I found your comments that we have your eyes and ears very interesting, because back in March of 2007, when COG held a similar forum like this, we thought we had the eyes and ears of the military and the FAA. Well, here we are almost 3.5 years later, and we still don't have them. I can speak from personal experience that over that period of time, I personally, and this is not a total collection of all of the incidents, but I personally reported over 350 incidents where helicopters were flying off route. And I sent those, emailed those inquiries or those incidents to Mr. Laser at the FAA, and then Colonel Rumali, who was the designated point of contact back in March of 2007, he also got served, and then he moved on. And then Colonel Gerald Ledewies came on, and she moved on. And then I guess you're the latest of the one that has that responsibility now. But the bottom line is that there wasn't any dialogue since March of 2007. You would report these incidents, and you never hear anything. And some of the, like Don Carr, has been very helpful and responsive in trying to be responsive, but he says, I don't have any control. I just file them in the circular file. So that's the issue, and there is not a system set up to respond to it.
You bring an incredible point that I think it was discussed in the outside about that just before we came in. It is, what is the entry point to gather information? It is not the Military District of Washington. We are one component of about 13 other tribes that are out there, portion. But I think it is prudent tonight to make a couple decisions. Decision number one, it is who is the entry point? And decision number two is when a complaint comes in, who is going to answer that in behalf of the 13 other tribes? I know we have.
Just one thing, when you're taking feedback from the community, just remember we're not all in the military. We don't know what all the different helicopters are, and when they're flying over at night, it's kind of hard to get the tail numbers off of them, or so. Just.
If I might, it seems to me that right now, if somebody calls my office and they have a complaint, we have a standard letter that we send out to them, and we direct them to contact the FAA Washington Flight Standards District Office, which I think is Mr. Viola, right?
That's correct.
And so I think the question really is, when a citizen comes to you with a concern about helicopter, and they send an email, as Mr. Hills might have done, or make
Correct.
a phone call.
I've got some of his emails here.
What happens next? What happens?
Well, what I'll do is, as a supervisor, we'll get either an email or phone call, and I believe you've talked to Inspector Coravu, who's dealing with you. And then once we do that, as I kind of was explaining, we'll plot to see where it was. We'll take the time, what time did it happen, where did it happen. We'll take a look at that. And then if it's, number one is recency. If we can get it really quick, we'll call down and we'll talk to people at ATC, and we'll ask a couple questions on the aircraft. And of course, mainly, as it was mentioned by Mr. Laser, if it's inside a certain area, absolutely positive control. We know exactly who was there, and they were there for a reason. And that pretty much ends it for us, because they were there, they were serving a purpose on the flight, and they had a mission to conduct, and then so there is no, what we do the investigation for is, one, what was the noise complaint? Second, was there any violations?
That's something Mr. Viola said is actually quite important, which is you check and you look for violations, right? And what does a violation mean, Mr. Viola?
Well, if they were not in accordance with the regulations, So if we had some questions about in that area, well, what if the helicopters weren't on the route? That's a violation.
Okay.
Well, and actually, it's still under the positive control of ATC. So if they're authorized a deviation or they're moving them off the route for a certain reason, the routes are there to help. Because again, you know, the main reason we're all here is because we want to fly neighborly. We want to pick routes, as it was discussed, that go over roads. But occasionally, for some other hazard, you may have to deviate off a route. So we'll go in and we'll plot it. And again, we'll determine who is flying. And if it's something that we can provide feedback, we will. We have contacts with the military, and if we know which aircraft it was, then we can call and we'll actually give them some feedback. Because again, the bottom line is that everybody knows we got to operate in the area. We do want to fly friendly, helicopters as well as airplanes, and so we want to try to help.
You know, sometimes things appear to be isolated incidents.
Correct.
And when you collect the data over a period of time, you begin to see a pattern.
Yes.
Either a pattern of the deviation always happens in the same place because that's where the traffic controller is comfortable telling people to go, or it's a particular service, or any number of things can contribute to a pattern. And I guess fundamentally, I think that's what we're all kind of looking at or wondering about is, do you look at that data for patterns?
Yes, we do.
And when you see a pattern, then what happens?
Well, if we see a pattern. One of them was, say they were cutting a corner on a route. We can pass that along that, hey, it seems that these certain aircraft or a certain time of the day, who seems to be flying, who seems to be cutting that route, and we'll try to get that organization information that...
Just a couple of things that I wanted to comment on. You kind of went directly to the heart of it, because oftentimes we use a term that really is not appropriate to this discussion, and that is violation. There aren't any of these operations are in violation of any FAA regulations.
I'll talk through the process for complaints, as you mentioned. I just want to highlight that, you know, we take this very seriously. We are good neighbors, good stewards. We respect your concerns. I have all your complaints, sir, and I have the one that was submitted today, number 349 at 4:05 this afternoon. A portion of my office, Community Relations, Mr. Ron McClendon, is the one you've been dialoguing with, and I've been included on that as well. Takes each one of your complaints, and we socialize that between myself and Don Carr over at Fort Belvoir. That is then taken to the Airfield Management Office, where we research, confirm whether we were in the air or we're not, and then we mitigate, report, and we log, and then we share that with our interagency partners as well. So, you know, that's all of the other tribes that Mr. Claudio mentioned. So I just want to let you know it is not lost in a circular file. It is logged. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah, it is not lost in the circular file. It is logged. And what we want to do is we always want to take a look at what the complaint was, when it happened, and see if we can get better across each one of our agencies. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood with your complaint specifically, and everyone's, that it is not just lost. And as far as turnover goes, we've got civilians in place both in Fort Belvoir and in my office that have been there for quite a while. And they are all familiar with the process that we use to research, confirm, mitigate, report, log, and then share that amongst our partners. And they take it very seriously. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that.
I just want to clarify, because I heard what Colonel Manning said, and I think I know what message he's trying to convey, but I'm not sure that that's how it was received. What he's referring to is he's confirming whether the Army operations are part of that. As you just pointed out, General Horst does not have the command authority over the Marines or the Air Force. So I think, first of all, the point is we need to get this at the right level, and maybe that's not General Horst for getting the other services involved here. But what he's referring to is the response time, is to confirm or deny whether it's one of us. And I guess I would just share with you, I understand what Colonel Romali said, my predecessor twice removed, and what commitment he had. And all I can say is he must have a big heart. But when I heard that from Colonel Ludowies when I first came on board about a month ago, my eyes got as big as saucers. And the reason they got that big was I realized that he didn't have that control, he doesn't have that insight, and he doesn't have the information to research to respond to your question in a manner that you want. But I guess what I don't want it to have happen is for whatever Colonel Manning conveyed to you is be interpreted as we have that insight under the other services, because we just don't. We have insight into what 12th Battalion and my assets at 12th Battalion and Davidson Army Airfield and the U.S. Army Priority Air Transport at Andrews, which is really not the issue for tonight. So I just want to make sure that was clear.
Let me.
You're correct in that the FAA has the information, but there are a couple factors that I will try to state. One is that typically you look at the Air Traffic Control Organization, which certainly has all the information. We're controlling all that traffic, but we don't have an office or an organization or an entity or the staffing to do anything other than look at safety violations. And those are the things that we pursue. And when we take a highly skilled employee and have them spend several hours or days investigating an incident that has safety bearing, that's very critical. Noise does not, unfortunately, fall into that level of priority. And so if I have to make a choice between staffing, as an example, the helicopter position, or having someone go down and listen to tapes and try to figure out what helicopter was over Glebe Road at 3:27 in the morning, that's what I'm drawing against. But unfortunately, that's not in our role. That's not a position that I hold, number one. But more importantly is if we took a snapshot of a week or 2 weeks, in all likelihood, we could capture what happens in this airspace and speak to that generically. But I will tell you right now that the aircraft that are operating in specific, I can't tell you about those aircraft.
I think we all understand that. I think we respect that. But what we're looking for is how can we help our citizens understand better when they should be concerned and when they should not.
And in your office or your organization or the Council of Governments or Fairfax County, whoever would like to take lead for collecting that, I'll commit that I will work with you to provide you with the basic amount of information about the typical operations. I could pull back the 386 messages that Ed has sent me, but I know where those are, and I know what that traffic is. Now, but if we can pull together and look at the generic footprint that's going on in the Washington Metro with the appropriate operators, and we can bring them to the table, then what we can really get out of that is, here are the hot spots. So as best you can, avoid those hot spots. Or if you can choose between going this route and this route, then don't always go on this one. Take a little variable there. I want to point out also that all the operations are conducted in the metro area based on criteria that's on that helicopter chart. Most of the areas of sensitivity inside that 7-mile ring are identified on that helicopter chart for operators to stay away from: Arlington, Fairlington, Shirlington, McLean. All of that's already in there. But perhaps just the opportunity to sit down in a forum, in a work group forum, and say, okay, so here's the operations, here's the military, we can bring in the law enforcement, we can bring in the medevac, we can bring all those players together, and perhaps come out of that with something meaningful.
The only thing I would comment is that the word, as some of the speakers have said, dialogue. Dialogue involves two people. And so all of the good work that you did in investigating and so forth, if you don't communicate back to the complainant, that is not dialogue. And so I hope whatever system we come up with after tonight does truly set up a dialogue system. And also I would add that you call these other tribes, well, one of the tribes that is a real consistent offender of flying off route are the ones with the white tops, the Hueys and the Black Hawks with the white tops. And it's my understanding that they're the HMX unit, the Marines that do it. And where are the Marines? The Marines aren't here tonight. And so I think there's a real problem, whatever system we set up in the future, how to get these tribes, who has control? General Horst, I guess, doesn't have control over telling the Marines to come here.
No,
so whoever has control needs, if it's at the DOD level, then we need to get that person be part of this system.
Let me go back to an offer that Mr. Laser made and see if I can put these pieces together, because I hear my citizen friends saying, every time I send in a complaint, I would like to know the answer one way or the other. Am I hearing you all properly? I'm also hearing people saying they don't necessarily have the staffing to make sure that happens. And as a policymaker myself, I'm a little bit more concerned about the pattern than the occasional one-off. So Mr. Laser, if we were to take you up on your offer to pull everybody, to do the 2-week snapshot, and then to pull everybody, which you can do, pull everybody into the room, all the different branches of the military, as well as the police people and the medevacs and all of that sort of stuff, and really sit down to look at this, could we also, as a part of that, since all of the, there's a level of complaint that Mr. Viola's office is getting, and he's evaluating one way or the other, is there any way to put this all together to come out with some kind of regular reporting, say, to electeds on volume that comes from our jurisdiction? Or, you know, so we have a sense and can then have a more informed conversation?
I think that I have to start that my response to that off with, and I don't mean to sound lame or flip or anything of that nature, but we have to understand what we think we're going to accomplish by doing that. So it's very important for us to recognize that we're not likely to change the operation inside that airspace that I spoke of. We're not likely to change the missions of the agencies that I could bring to that meeting. So we need to kind of have that understanding. So a helicopter, Fairfax County comes with Fairfax 1 and flies over my house for an hour at night with a spotlight. I pretty much know what they're doing. And I don't need to call up Schriff and tell him, get your helicopter out, because he's not going to do that. And I don't want him to do that. So that really becomes the question. If I look at the Route 7, Route 5 issue, the question is, what is the expectation that we would do? We're not going to likely stop operations on Route 5 and Route 7. And when Arlington County is called in for airborne assistance to a robbery incident someplace in the county, we're not going to, you know, that's it's going to happen. Right. And so it becomes very important for us to have a realistic expectation of what we can do with that. Right. If the expectation is that we have a dialogue, okay, not you firing off emails and wondering where they went, a dialogue and a common understanding and a sincerity about concern, about not repeating habits that we don't have to repeat, about, you know, using some form of a scatter plan, that's all well and good. But I think that, you know, that we just have to have a common understanding of what the expectation is going in.
Mr. Gallo.
Okay, so what we appear to be circling around is a mechanism for dialogue and feedback and such. When you deal with individual noise complaints or concerns, not even just a noise complaint, a concern about an operation or an inquiry about an operation, the challenge is, and I'm going to use the New York metropolitan area as an example here just quickly. For the last 6 or 7 years, we've been trying to consolidate databases of noise complaints and inquiries and those type of things. We have the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We have the mayor's office. We have the FAA. We have whatever comes into the FAA at any level, we do a preliminary scrub and say, does it belong to flight standards? Does it belong to airports? Does it belong back to the mayor's office? Does it belong back to the operator of the airport, who is really responsible for the safe operation of the airport? And in that particular case, Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We reach out to Long Island, to New Jersey, across states and such. So the challenge is, A, to get the one inquiry that we can make a difference with, to move the data point just a little bit. The next part of the challenge is being responsive, so you know that somebody is hearing you, and like you referenced, a dialogue. With some of the municipalities that we deal with, they like to keep it internal. When we deal with elected officials and municipalities and whatever, we come to these type of sessions to engage in that type of dialogue, to listen, to try to get a moving off point to the next step. Where does that go? Yeah, people do change. Processes change. The situation changed. This changed on 9/11. All right, and it does evolve to some point, but predictability and the missions that these gentlemen deal with day in and day out don't change a lot. So, but they're there for a reason. There are people, and I'm not being flippant about this, that would like to become email pen pals, you know, and to be responsive each and every, you know, complaint or concern. That's not what we're looking to do with this. We're looking to take buckets and you mentioned hotspots and start a dialogue and to discuss that. We like to give preliminary information as well as overall fact sheets to the elected officials and to the municipalities on the stuff that we can share so that you can make an intelligent decision of an initial inquiry. So, you know, we have quite a bit of brain power here tonight, and I hope that, you know, with Mr. Laser and the military representatives here and the tribes that are not represented here, I don't know, was the expectation that, you know, and I was the one who took the responsibility to round everybody up. So I said military, so I did what I could as far as, you know, getting as many as I could. So if I miss somebody, I guess I'm going to hear about that right afterwards, you know, who we need to get in touch with. But they don't work for me, and that's not an excuse. That's a reality. So, but I know who we need to dialogue with after this to get the right people to the table, if in fact that they're going to make a difference. And the piece of this dialogue is to make a difference, to be responsive. And I'm going to say that again. You know, the eyes are open, the ears are open. But to Mr. Laser's comments, you know, what's the expectation? The expectation is to be responsive, and what that looks like is different to different people. So,
can I add 2 points that tag on to 2 themes brought up here, and that's the dialogue piece, and that's the expectation management that Mr. Laser just brought up. I guess from our perspective, what we would ask is, you know, we've come with open arms, and we've tried to convey to you what we do to mitigate the impact of our operations on the community. As part of that dialogue piece, what I would ask from you all as well as the representatives for your communities is help us carry that message back, because we can't always respond to your constituents' concerns. You see them first, you hear from them first. I guess what I would ask is you give us some benefit of the doubt that we do whatever we can within our abilities to mitigate the impact of our operations. So that's the dialogue piece. As far as the expectation management piece, Mr. Laser laid out a couple scenarios with law enforcement operations and whether the expectation is that they have a legitimate purpose there. My talk on the expectation management is what's realistic in terms of where is it over the road, where is the helicopter really at in relation to over the road. You see a high-level summary at 1 to 125,000 feet, so 1 inch equals 125,000 inches in reality, so that's a blow-up. But all of you that have driven those roads in reality understand there's several twists and turns in that road. And to expect a helicopter at either 300 or 1,000 feet above to perfectly fly over that road at every second of that flight is really unrealistic. There will be times when they are off the road because they cannot maintain perfect sync with the road in a helicopter at that altitude. The rotor disc is not that responsive, and it's very difficult to see exactly where the twists and turns are. That may be only 50 or 100 feet left or right, especially with the construction in the Springfield interchange, especially with the different construction zones along 395. So I guess from the expectation piece, help us get the message on what's realistic in terms of what does over the road mean. The last piece I would leave you is it's a two-way street on those routes. And we have got to maintain a safe distance from opposing traffic. And during my one brief flight on Friday, I had several aircraft that were coming in the opposite direction. You've got to give way to the other aircraft to allow a safe passage. And that means flying offset of the road at some distance. We do what we can to stay over the road at all times, but to expect perfect sync up with the pavement below is not realistic. Thank you.
Just to comment on that, we're not expecting perfection, and we're not just talking about, like Mr. Laser says, cutting the corner between Route 5 and 7. We're talking about helicopters going north-south along Route 5 that may be several blocks off the route, and the going cross-country. I mean, Route 7's dead ends into Route 5, and you'll see helicopters going straight east, going cross-country. So it just isn't Arlington residents that are affected by it. They're flying over Alexandria residents. And so I don't know why they go cross-country. Just the only thing that comes to mind is expedience. So we're not talking about fudging the routes, going a couple of feet off the routes. We can live with that. We can live with cutting corners. But we can't live with helicopters flying several blocks off the routes or going cross-country.
Which I think really takes us back to Mr. Laser's offer of trying to do this snapshot to see. Because it's not just Fairlington. I have complaints from other neighborhoods that are down there where the two come together about cutting the corners and flying pretty low over people's houses. So we need to verify how often that happens, and we need to figure out how we get through that. So I think for myself, perhaps for Supervisor Hyland and George from the Council of Governments, I think we'd love to take you up on your offer, Mr. Laser, to begin to do this work.
Which offer was that?
No, I do think, I think that would do a lot to move the ball. And I want to return to what I suggested to you, which is that as we bring everybody together, we start to think about what the mechanism might be for some sort of regular conversation about what we're experiencing. Dialogue doesn't necessarily have to mean you get back to everybody every single time, but if you want us to help educate our citizenry, we do have to have a sense of, if there's a persistent pattern, there's a way that it gets addressed, and that that it circles back, as opposed to that individualized information, which I know you feel very protective of.
In the contiguous United States and the FAA regulations are paramount. That's what they follow, military and such. So to that, again, I'll make a commitment to work with the people sitting here today and the Council of Governments to explore the possibility of some continued, more formalized dialogue, whatever that turns into. So, and Rick.
You have my commitment. I do have some sources that I work with. I meet with an interagency group now every 2 weeks, but I have contacts at the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, and I promise you I will leave my business cards. I will get the appropriate point of contacts for HMX-1, First Heli, Customs Border Protection, who did I leave out? U.S. Coast Guard, DEA, state law enforcement, local law enforcement. I'll get the appropriate points of contact, work with Carmine, Bob, and the council to get the appropriate phone numbers or points of contact for those noise complaints that are service specific.
Mr. Laser, one thing that you said in your presentation gave me a thought. You mentioned that at night, when the traffic is less, and I know that at National that means kind of after 10, it's often possible for helicopters to fly higher. And I think it's probably fair to say we get more complaints at night than any other time from our citizens. So I'm just wondering, again, a topic for our conversation might be whether those ceilings can go up some at night, because you said the Fly Friendly program does tell people to fly at the top.
If I may, I'm actually excited to take point on this, and I don't usually volunteer for too many things, as Carmine could say, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to make very clear. I want to speak on behalf of all the operators that are not here, because I've been working with all of those operators for a lot of years. And for whatever disconnect reason, they're not here because they didn't know to be here. I guarantee you that every one of them would have been happy to come here and represent the missions they fly, the services they provide. So for me to pull together all of the entities is, we do that every year anyway. So I'm just going to pull them together on a special event for a different reason, and we just need to work together on how that's going to shape up so that we can come up with a package that we can then take out and share with the community. And I think that it's important that we try to to come up with a vehicle where we do that in an ongoing status. You know, Ed, we've been at how many of these over the years? The point is that we don't need to wait until things bubble up to a problem before we try to go out and do community outreach and talk about what's going on and what can we do differently. I don't know what the solution is for Route 7 and Route 5, but if the community says, we think that you should fly 100 yards south in May and 100 yards north in April, okay, we could probably do that. So that's the important part of having the community involved, is that we put down things that we think are the best to serve the operation and to serve the community, but the community certainly has to have a voice in that. So I'm looking forward to doing that, and I can speak on behalf of the FAA and the Washington District. We will support whatever the community needs.